Well, it is time again for Around the Horn with CB, episode 2. And let me begin by immediately apologizing to everyone listening out there because last week when I was on, I made a ridiculous comment that The Bachelor started on the 6th, which actually it starts tonight, which is the 7th, which is the night of the national championship. And tonight, I'm no longer at the pool at Weston, Florida. Instead, I'm back in the ATL, a sunny ATL. And last week you heard me mention my greatest of friends, Andy, and he's given me the okay, Andy Stearns. And actually, I'm in his basement right now as we prepare to watch the national championship. But instead, I'm going to have a little podcast, number 2, Around the Horn with CB, with my guest, Andrew Bruce Stearns. Welcome, sir.
Thomas, it is a great honor here to be with you, sir. I cannot wait to discuss whatever needs to be discussed at this discussion point.
Well, what we need to begin by discussing is Georgetown University. Now, Andy and I, for those of you who don't know, and many of you do not know, we go back over, 40 years-ish. It all began at the land of the Hoyas, Georgetown University. And the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that for those of you out there, you're going to find this hard to believe, that a man could be a freshman in college and have never worn a pair of jeans. That is a true story. He's here, and could you confirm that that is the truth and tell us the story behind it?
It is not only confirmed, sir, but what is so ironic about it was an attempt at that point, being late 70s, of actually making a fashion statement. The irony was that the clothes I wore in lieu of wearing jeans were beyond embarrassing and a disgrace to the male race during the 1970s, where you look at pictures of me, I can't speak for you, sir, I don't know if I saw you particular clothes back in the 70s, horrendous dressing, but thinking that I was being fashionable because our grandfather ran a clothing store, which still exists in Binghamton, New York, we thought we were just above wearing jeans. We had to wear nicer clothes. A pathetic display, sir.
That is a bad display, and the one thing that I comes to term with is the dress I had in my workout outfits back in those days. I actually had polyester shorts that were incredibly short, tube socks, multicolored, pulled up to my cavities, and then finally, believe it or not, I went to the Bob Greasy Carl Noonan sports camp when I was a kid, and I wore a matching headband for every pair of polyester shorts and tube socks. Is that pathetic or what?
It is, in slight defense of us, if you look at the culture at that time, sir, in the 70s, we were not actually that far off the norms back in those days. In fact, if you obviously watch some of the basketball games from the great Celtics teams, some of the other teams, when we would watch the Knicks growing up, you might have watched, I guess there was no Miami Heat. What the hell basketball did you watch when you were down there?
There was no basketball back during that time, so actually I was I really didn't get to the courts very often.
You weren't into the Buffalo Braves?
No.
Well, the outfits were horrendous. They had very large socks that came very far up the legs, often past the knee. They did have the long polyester shorts. So it wasn't just us. I will say that in slight defense of us.
But we were at Georgetown during the heyday. Let's get back to that because the new coach of the Hoyas, Mr. Patrick Ewing, was the star player during that time. Those are the big years of the Big East basketball.
Sir, 79 to 83 in our college days, the peak of the Big East basketball era. It is sorely missed. There was a fantastic special done, I believe, about 3, 4, or 5 years ago, narrated by the great Liv Schreiber, about Requiem for the Big East and about how fantastic that league was just coming into fruition, I believe, as we were coming into college.
And I do believe you did attend a national championship. Is that correct?
It is sadly not correct. I missed that trip, the one to New Orleans. I believe it was Mr. Weiss, maybe Harry Kane, because they're the ones that are on the screen. I believe Mariano probably went with them. And ultimately they went. I did not make that trip. Another error, sir, that I made not going, as I did not attend the 1976 Olympics in Montreal when I was given an opportunity at Camp Samoset 2 for boys. I made a big mistake not attending these big events.
But let me tell you what I did attend, and I'm very excited about it. Growing up in South Florida, I want you to know, being a big Steelers fan, I want you to know that I attended both Pittsburgh Super Bowl championships over the Cowboys in the Orange Bowl, the 17-0 Wave Your Hanky Dolphins, and that's 1972, of course, and I was at the famous Dolphin hook and ladder loss to the San Diego Chargers in the playoffs.
Sir, I've known
Air Coryell.
I have known you for 40 years.
That's right.
And you and I have never discovered the fact until this very moment that you and I were both at that game, which was 40 years ago.
Are you kidding me?
January 2nd, 1982, because I received a text from a camper, ex-camper, and it went to Foon and to me saying, This was the 40-year anniversary when we were at the Orange Bowl for that incredible game, and Foon will never forgive me to this day. He's still angry at me because I was quietly rooting for the Chargers because I was like a Jet fan, so I couldn't root for the Dolphins, who were very good back in those days, obviously. That game was incredible. I remember the hook and ladder play before halftime.
That's right.
I remember the missed field goals. I think Benershka had one blocked, or he missed one, the other guy had one blocked. It went back and forth. The famous Winslow walking off the field, dehydrated, one of the greatest games of all time. Sir, I had no idea you were in attendance at that game.
And those are the kind of things that come out on Around the Horn with CB. You have a guest, you discuss things, and that's pretty amazing to me. And actually, what I want to talk about as we continue discussing the Georgetown Hoyas. I was in a car the other day. I was doing a move. As many of you know, my daughter, we talked about this. She moved to UGA, to Georgia. And by the way, her new house, I would say, is a mix between Silence of the Lambs, Animal House, and a cool college house that we would love to live in. But we were driving along, and we're talking about mascots. So let's talk about mascots for a second. So he's going to Auburn, this student. And so I'm trying to figure out, are they the War Eagles or are they the Tigers? And he went on to explain to me that they're the Tigers, but they say War Eagle as a reference to acknowledging that they go to the school. Makes really no sense to me, although... Let's talk Georgetown.
We cannot complain given that we had the worst nickname in the history of college sports, the Hoyas. We had to live through this. It made no sense. It came from Hoya Saxa, which I believe was a combination of both a Greek and a Latin term.
Which means, what rocks?
What rocks, referring to the Stonewalls, which was the nickname of the defense back in, the early 1900s, something
Yes.
of a strong Georgetown defensive team. A horrible nickname that is still to this day makes no sense. And the mascot is a bulldog.
So we stole the Georgia Bulldogs.
Stole the Georgia Bulldog.
But I guess the other option is you walk around with a rope around a giant rock, and I mean it would not be the most. You'd have the Michigan State Spartan, you'd have all these other things, and then you got the rock.
The rock, and the guy would be dressed up as like a Greek philosopher with a beard on, and just walking around discussing the meaning of
Socrates. I love that. That's fantastic. So getting past Socrates, let me move on to the next thing I want to discuss with you, because you are, we used to be big, we've talked film buffs, you know about the Bass movie rating system. I talked about it last week. You have kind of eased on out of the flow of film, but you are my main man as far as binge TV watching. I've gotten away from it, so if you don't mind, for those listeners out there, share with us a couple of the hot news shows, or what do people need to be seeing out there right now that you've been watching?
Well, it's a very good question, sir, and you, as you know, we've seen an evolution in the industry. What's happened, I believe, is that there's so much money now that has gone into Netflix and other services, mainly Netflix, that they're able to now attract incredible levels of talent and the best writers, because movies, as you know, I think you mentioned this to me not long ago, are very risky. Very risky. These budgets are huge. Very few movies actually make money in the long run.
Right.
Television is much more of a profitable industry based on both their budgets and their distribution philosophy and policies. They don't have to spend all that money on marketing, and they're getting all this from Netflix and these other providers. So what's happened between that and Amazon and Hulu and everything else is people are now completely changing, overturning their watching habits, completely different from when we were growing up and you had 3 channels. Then eventually we had the cable explosion. We had 50 channels, then it was 100 channels. Now you have tons of services. You can watch any type of show that you want, and they're very good, just like Amazon would be when you watch something and giving you a bunch of recommendations.
Okay.
So, for example, years ago, my wife and I stumbled onto Bloodline. Just happened to be one of the shows.
Which you suggested I watch. And being from South Florida, I just want you to know, I did watch it. Phenomenal show.
Especially
Phenomenal
the first season, right? The first
season, but I mean, it kept me going the whole time. And I know you wanted me to watch Friday Night Lights. I think about that because the same actor,
Kyle Chandler,
was in both shows. I never got to Friday Night Lights, though. I'm sorry to say, I did not watch that show.
Fans of Coach B, of CB.
Yeah, CB.
Will continue to be stunned until you watch that series. In fact, I am now going to commit on this podcast. I'm going to buy you the series and ship it to you. I just don't know what format to give it to you on. Whether
In fact, I'm going to take it one step beyond that. I think from now on, when I have my podcast, I'm going to watch 3 to 4 episodes, and they're just going to listen to me watch the episodes for hours. I mean, that'd be great podcast listening, just to hear me respond every once in a while with a something like that.
Oh my God!
Oh my God!
Yeah.
To that, it's not a bad idea. What do you think?
And then they have to guess what the episode is, so they really have to study that episode. And if they call in with the correct episode, you will send them the DVD of that specific episode.
I love that. I love that. It's a
Fantastic.
great idea. I don't think it'll work, though. But I will tell you, before I get you back to talking about some specific shows, my middle daughter is now insanely crazy about watching the show The Vampire Diaries.
Wow. So
Non-stop. It's binge, heavy-duty binging. She's got the whole family watching it. I've tried to hold out as long as I can, but she's pushing hard for The Vampire Diaries.
the younger generation, of course, she is among the generation that my kids are in. My kids are a little bit older than her, but not much. And they all kind of grew up in this revolution of television and movies and everything else. And it is fascinating what shows they will stumble on, and it will go viral. They'll start putting it out. The word gets out on social media. They start thinking about it. And some of these shows that get big, you would never expect that to happen. For example, I'm sure your daughters have been into Grey's Anatomy.
Yes.
It was a mainstream hit like 15 years ago.
It's so true.
My wife and I watched it for the first several years. We kind of lost interest in it. Huge with the younger generation.
Big. Friends is big right now. Friends is
Unbelievable.
big. Everybody
It's been
loves
off the
Friends.
air for, I think, a decade. It's absolutely incredible that they can find these old shows. But again, it's the power of streaming, of being able to put on what you want at any time, take it with you on your iPad or on the plane, wherever you're going. A fantastic revolution, sir. We couldn't even have dreamt about from 1979 to 1983 at Georgetown, sir, when we had 4 televisions.
That is correct, sir. And I want to tell you, back in those days, this is kind of a funny story, and I think you'll remember this. Back in those days was the beginning of a broadcast known as MTV Music Television, okay? And my father used to have, well, first of all, he swore that Betamax was the answer to the future, that VHS would never make it. Forget about CDs, forget about anything else. It was all about the Beta.
A fantastic call. I watched that Betamax many times in your house.
We had a Betamax that weighed like 70 pounds, but I'll never forget, back at the Georgetown days, my dad would just tape 3 hours of MTV. He would send the tape up, and if you recall, people would come to my apartment and literally be in awe watching MTV. In fact, the big, of course, album of the time was Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller, which people were in awe of course, the song Thriller and Beat It and Billie Jean.
And the videos were revolutionary. It changed the way that we listened to music because all of a sudden you were associating videos with it. Now, of course, eventually it morphed and became an absurdity, right? That's up. But for the first couple of years, it was fantastic. It was a whole different way to listen to music. One of our college friends was big into the new wave movement, which obviously became very big. That was the first new wave. There were later new waves later. And ultimately, I think you could argue that MTV is being copied now by other services that will start out something like that, and then they kind of get away from their core. You could argue that ESPN is like this.
That's a good point.
It will start with a core of something, and then they just try to get so big and do other things, and eventually it kind of peters out, I think, in terms of their relevance. But as long as they're making money, I guess, and staying in business, MTV is still around, right? It's still a channel.
I mean, I don't watch it, but yeah, I guess so. And from time to time, they do throw back to some of the old videos.
Fantastic. The Great Flag, the music of Dire Straits at the time in the early days.
Duran Duran was big back during that time, and fantastic. So we talked last week. You weren't, of course, on the show, but we talked about your knowledge and your commitment to live music. We've gone to so many concerts together, but let's talk about Peter Frampton. Okay,
Peter Frampton.
Let's, if you would please let our listening audience know the infamous 40-year story that we can leave it up to them to explore, and how this came to fruition. Well, it really didn't come to fruition, but tell the story about Peter Frampton, if you will.
Fantastic. Many people will know that Frampton had a very interesting career. He came up with Mott the Hoople, I believe. He was the, did I get that right? No, it wasn't Mott the Hoople. It was the other band. No, we'll look that up later. We'll correct that. But he came up as a guitarist, Humble Pie. He was a guitarist in Humble Pie. And then he went on to a solo career, and in the mid-'70s, 76 or so, they released Frampton Comes Alive.
Do you feel like I do?
And live versions of those songs, which had been recorded in the studio years earlier, based on the marketing that was going on at that time. This was the time Jaws came out, I believe, in 74. So what happened was by the mid-'70s, the blockbuster was everything, whether it was music, whether it was movies, and they would market this, and they marketed Peter Frampton, who was an incredibly good-looking guy, to the teenage audience that went absolutely insane over this guy. Both guys and girls liked him, girls for his looks, guys more for his guitar playing, and this album was monstrous. It was a double album.
It was a double album.
Which required extra money. And on the double album, there was the monstrous 13, 14-minute opus called Do You Feel Like We Do that you were just singing. And at the end of it, it's a phenomenal guitar jam. But as he introduces the band live, sir, on it, he's going around. There's a great keyboard solo, at which point he states, purportedly, Bob Mayo, who was his guitarist, late Bob Mayo, died not too long ago, I have said for 40 years, as do a few other friends of mine, that he said Bub Mayo on the keyboards, Bub Mayo.
Now, let me interrupt you a minute, because those of you that know, and probably most of the listeners out there know, Do You Feel Like We Do? And if you're not, go listen to that song. It is a true classic along the lines of Free Bird or Stairway to Heaven for you rock and rollers out there. But in this song, I am guaranteeing you that he does not say Bob Mayo. He does not say Bub Mayo, that he says Funk Man. Funk Man on the keyboard. So for 40 years, my buddy Andy here, my closest of closest, we've had this discussion, this argument. It hasn't caused us to part ways at all.
Absolutely
okay?
not. But it's
we are
been
friends.
a running classic joke between us for 40 years with a couple of Georgetown people involved in this and my wife.
And what he did ask me to give into, which I was weak, and I did say it's possible that he says Funk Mayo. Okay? But I'm still saying it's Funk Man. So this all led up to really the apex of this whole argument occurred.
Fantastic. About 2 years ago?
2 years ago. So take us through what happened.
2 years ago, I secretly purchased 4 tickets with a meet and greet with Peter Frampton and took my wife and then Thomas and my brother, who's gone to a million concerts with me, and the 4 of us went to this, and it was going to be a surprise to everyone. But you ended up having I believe it may have been a baseball trip or something you needed to go on or whatever it was, and I said, you can't go. And I had to tell you up front what it was. So you stayed in Atlanta. We went to the show, and we decided we had a pact. We knew it wouldn't be long. We'd have maybe 30 seconds. We ended up having about 2 or 3 minutes, I thought, with Frampton.
That's correct.
Which worked out very well. We were going to find a way to ask this very famous rock star 40 years ago on an album, did you say Funk Man or Bob Mayo on the keyboard?
And I went in with complete confidence that it was going to be Funk Man, and I would be victorious, because why wouldn't it be Funk Man?
And as you can imagine, we had to kind of slide in. There was no real natural way to say this. We were sort of standing with them. People were taking pictures of us with our phones. And as I'm leaving, I sort of looked at him and said, you got to answer this question, because it's been a 40-year debate with my best buddy and me. I'm saying it in fast motion. On Frampton Comes Alive, when you introduced the band, did you say Bob Mayo on the keyboards or Funk Man on the keyboards?
And let me just say, when Andy asked him this question, he was stunned. He gave just a look like, what are you talking about? And we tried to explain he had no idea that this has been a discussion for 40 years. So it got quiet in there. It was like crickets.
It was. We're walking away.
We're walking away. People were like, what is he saying? They were paying attention. This is the big moment. And the result was?
Well, and then you said, you've got to answer this question. It
was it Funk Mayo, or was it Bob Mayo? Was it Funk Man? What was it?
And he looks at us and he puts his finger up and he goes, I cannot divulge. One of the greatest answers of all time. He played along with it, and the 40-year mystery remains. It will never be solved.
And therefore, in conclusion, the proof is in the pudding that I still stand by. It is Funk Man. So I want all of you tonight to listen, take 15 minutes aside, even though you've put in some time to, Around the Horn with CB. I want you to listen to that song, and I want you to get back to me. Remember, you can email me, tommbass11@gmail.com, or get back to me on Twitter, or get back to me on Facebook. But I want to know, is it Bob Mayo, Bub Mayo, Funk Man, or Funk Mayo? That is your goal for tonight. I'm putting them out there, and I'm going to make them let me know that. So getting back to the Binge TV. So first of all, before I get a couple of the shows that I need you to not only review, but give some suggestions to those listeners out there, and we have plenty. Throngs. The key word for this show is throngs. We have throngs and throngs upon throngs, okay, of listeners. But I do want you to know that my favorite binge, and I'm not a big binge guy because I enjoy going to the movies like I mentioned last week. I've got to have my Raisinets. I need the Diet Coke. I've got to go into the theater and spend that extra $8 to $10 for a $1 box of Raisinets and 7 cents worth of Coke.
I've attempted on many occasions to literally force you to buy at a Rite Aid or any kind of a drugstore. They're 99 cents, $1.05. Please buy this, bring it in, and you have an absolute resistance to doing this. You must overpay for the Raisinets.
I have to do it. It just makes me feel good about myself. I've got the stubs. I've got the Premier card, so I get the points. I get a couple bucks off. It's fabulous. But I do want you to know the Binge show, probably my favorite show of all time. Nothing matches it. Breaking Bad is still the greatest show to me ever on television.
I completely concur. I'm not even taking credit for that. I told you had to watch the show because I think you came to it a little late, right?
Yeah, I definitely came late to it.
And you got into it right away, and you absolutely stuck with it. I agree with you. I think it was the second to last episode with the Hank situation played out. I think it was the best hour of TV I think I've ever seen, ever. The last episode I liked to love the ending, the music,
right.
The great Badfinger song was fantastic. But I agree with you. I think it was the greatest show. It never jumped the shark.
Nope.
It completely stayed on. No character was boring. Nobody seems to be a throw-in. And my only issue with The Sopranos, which is also considered by many to be the greatest show of all time, I think they went on some of these kind of trajectories and arcs that were like, that really didn't really work.
And that happened with me. I really enjoy Sons of Anarchy as well. And I think that towards the end of Sons of Anarchy, it just basically ran out of control. I mean, everybody was getting killed. It was just out of control. The story got kind of corrupted, if you will. And it was still a great show. I love Sons of Anarchy. But what about something what's out now that we need to be watching out there?
Well,
my CB listeners.
I saw the Globes last night just a little bit. It was a very boring show, candidly, but I did see some of the winners. I was paying attention to that, at least in the paper, too. And Sandra Oh from Grey's Anatomy, who's a phenomenal actress, she did correctly win for Killing Eve, which is an insane one season so far. It's coming back, I believe, maybe a 10-episode series between her, and I will not be spoiling anything, and the serial killer, these two, the actressing. Of course, the actressing.
Yeah, the actressing.
The actressing is unbelievable between these two. It's a phenomenal show, extremely well done, very intense, but also greatly darkly comical. A fantastic show. Killing Eve is fantastic.
Okay.
There's a lot of British shows out there that are on like Amazon, some are on Netflix. There's one, I believe, called Mrs. Foster that I highly recommend. Doesn't get a lot of press in the U.S. It was a great series. A woman finds out without him knowing that her husband's having an affair, and she basically slowly loses it in this series and becomes very violent and crazed. It's extremely well acted by both her and the spouse and the other side characters. Highly recommend that one. It's Dr. Foster is what it's called, Dr. Foster. So
Okay.
in the podcast, we occasionally can correct
Oh, it does.
ourselves.
Yeah. We jump all over the place because it's around the horn, so that's okay.
100%. Highly recommend it.
I also watched again bits and pieces of the Globes last night. I'm usually an avid fan, and I'm a big Carol Burnett guy, and I was so happy that she had the award named after her, which is fantastic. Jeff Bridges, I'm a fan of his, but his speech was just Jeff Bridges. That's all I can say.
He was the dude all the way.
He was. He kind of went beyond last night.
It seemed like only he and Carol Burnett kind of were even interesting to watch in terms of their responses. It was a very boring show. They had muted the comics. Nothing was particularly funny. No speeches were particularly memorable. It was a very off show, which is interesting as we can segue into the Oscars that Kevin Hart is not going to host it. I don't know who's going to host the show, but after last night, it's going to be very reluctant for most people to want to be able to do that. And
like I said, I'm not going to say I protest, but I really don't have a vested interest in maybe just because, like I said last week on the show, it's been a weak year for movies, although since we've spoken, I did see a film that on my BAS scale, which I explained to everybody last week, I would give a 4 to. I really enjoyed The Favorite. I thought it was a really, really good film. Emma Stone was great. Rachel Weisz was great. All the way around, it was just a really good, it's a period piece, but a very cleverly written and well acted film. I'd give that a 4.
So your top 2 films of the year would be what at this point?
Well, as I've said last week, my only 5 for the whole year is American Animals.
Yep, coming out January 11th, I believe, on Netflix.
Strongly recommend American Animals, and I don't want to get too redundant or repetitive from last week, but here's the thing. Everybody's so into the whole concept of superhero stuff, so I'm going to fall into the trap, and I'm going to say a movie is only as good to me as its villain, and I will say Thanos was a great villain, so I will give in and say the Avengers Infinity War, I would give a 4 because I thought that was a great villain.
Excellent, sir. Very, very good call. Yeah, there were some good films, as you said, but I agree with you on the whole. The holiday season show, because usually the best films come out obviously around Christmas. It was very slim pickings around Christmas time. Even though I don't go as often, I usually watch these movies on planes. My sleeper was just one last thing on movies. I think it was last year though. I think I pushed you hard on the Florida Project, which was this low-budget film filmed in Florida with some incredible acting by these kids. We'll see what they do.
Willem Dafoe.
Willem Dafoe did get nominated.
Yeah.
But other than that, the rest of the cast was kind of no-name, and that the kid was fantastic. The mother was great. Highly recommended if people have not seen the Florida Project.
And as we near the end of the podcast, we have a little bit of time left. You are a well-traveled man.
Yes, sir.
For your work, you're in the computer industry.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and we're not going to get into computers today, but you've been a good guest. You've got a very good opportunity to come back and visit me on Around the Horn with CB.
I am very excited.
It may not be episode 3, but you will come back. But you were telling me a story the other day about, which I find very interesting, about famous people that you bump into. And tell us a little bit about a story that you mentioned not too long ago about a famous person you happened to unknowingly bump into.
And this is not done with any level of braggadocio. This has nothing to do with me, but I stayed at a hotel in the New York City area. It's a very high-end Hyatt, I can say. And I don't pay to stay there. I use all my points based on my other travel.
Do you eat the free breakfast?
I do. I get a free breakfast because I stay so often at Hyatt. It's a phenomenal breakfast, and you can meet me anytime, sir, that I have a free breakfast at any of the Hyatt properties.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Including the
My
Hyatt
listeners
places
have heard that.
It's on the record.
Okay.
So last year, about a year and a half to 2 years ago, my children still cannot believe this happened, and they're still angry at me. They didn't recognize her. I basically was in the gym area and was in the jacuzzi with one other person. It's a very high-end, quiet, very luxurious feel. And basically, I was trying to stay away from this person because you don't want to feel like I'm a stalker in a jacuzzi with one other person in it.
Exactly.
But I had to kind of tiptoe very quickly around her to get to the jets because the jets only work in 2 different areas of this jacuzzi. So long story short is, I didn't say anything to her except that, excuse me, I just got to come around here and do this. And she said in this deep voice, go for it. I didn't recognize the voice. She had a baby.
It's a hint, by the way.
Yep.
So think of a famous female.
Yep.
Can I say singer?
Yes.
Singer with a raspy voice.
Very raspy voice, kind of a southern accent-ish. And I still didn't think anything about it. She then exited that, went behind us into the steam room. I waited a gentlemanly at least 5-6 minutes. I'd had enough of the jacuzzi. I went into the steam room where she was still in the steam room. I didn't go anywhere near her. I knew the steam room. Apparently she did not, because I went to the shower in the steam room, sir, where you can turn it on and have cold water come on to you while you are steaming.
Okay. Is that a word, steaming?
Steaming, absolutely. It's a verb.
Verb, okay.
It's a verb.
You were steaming in the steam room.
I was steaming in the steam room.
Andy was steaming in the steam room.
It's a steaming situation.
Okay.
And all of a sudden I hear, I didn't know that was in here, this voice.
Sounds like a serial killer.
So eventually she walked out of there. Eventually she walked out of the entire area itself. And I sat down on my beautiful, luxurious chair. And randomly, within 5 minutes, I ran into someone else, not a star, an old boss's boss of mine who I hadn't seen in probably 10 years. And I was like, I won't mention his name, but I said, Jim, I can't believe this is you. And he greeted me, and we're hugging and all this stuff. And he's like, man, my kids are all excited. Miley Cyrus was just in here.
So you were with Miley Cyrus.
I was in a jacuzzi and a steam room with no one else near us for at least 15 minutes, if not 20, with Miley Cyrus. Had no idea it was her, sir.
Was Billy Ray Cyrus or his mullet anywhere around?
Absolutely nowhere to be found. She was on her own. I looked it up. She was in town for appearing on both a concert and a show. A year later, by the way, real fast, at that same gymnasium, I ran into somebody who I did recognize as I was going up. It was just me, him, and his trainer, and I looked at him from about 5 feet away, and then I looked away, Mick Jagger, in the same hotel.
And I'm going to guess that you were in better shape than he was.
I was not in better shape than he was. He was in much better shape than I was. He's very skinny. He looks incredible for his age, except for the face, obviously, he looks very old. And he was talking to his trainer, so I had to prove this. So I very surreptitiously put on my recorder, of course, on my phone while I was working on it, and I'd have him on audio. Unmistakable accent. That is the hotel to go at, obviously, the Park Hyatt in New York City, sir.
That's a great story. And by the way, there is a chance, we'll get to it another time, that we might actually try and make a road trip to see the Rolling Stones who are touring this year, by the way.
100%. We've missed them when they were 40, 50, 60, and 70 years old. Now that they're 85.
Now they are 120 years old and they are cryogenically frozen, basically. Well, I'm going to close it out with a little story myself. When I, many years ago, went with my baseball team down to South Florida for spring break, we were in the lobby, we were checking in. And there's very strange, and I'm sure she's probably listening to the show right now, so I'm not trying to be mean about this, as is Miley Cyrus. I'm sure, along with Paul Stanley, who was mentioned last week, all these people listen to Around the Horn with CB.
Huge and growing audience.
Growing, it throngs. So anyway, I was in a hotel, not quite as nice as the one you were describing, but I was with my baseball team, and a woman walked by that had on these very kind of the polyester shorts I mentioned back from the 70s, these long fishnet stockings, and looked very... can I use ragamuffin? My mom used to use ragamuffin.
Excellent word.
Thank you.
Rarely
so she looked rather ragamuffin. She walks by, and I'm like, oh, my Lord, who in the world? And my guys go, we don't, that's some new singer, someone, her name is Lady Gaga. And here we go, Lady Gaga, who, by the way, nominated, won.
Won a few things, but lost some of the things.
But she was nominated, Lady Gaga, and no kidding, 2 months after that, this was in April, like in June of that year, and for those of you out there, you can check what year it was, Poker Face, I guess, hit it big, and no longer was Lady Gaga traveling in a bus. She was now with, flying, her own jet probably, okay? Well, Andrew, I want you to know it's been an honor to have you as a guest tonight, guest number 2 for episode 2 of Around the Horn with CB, who you argue should be Coach Bass, not CB.
Or Coach B, if you want to keep it more subtle.
Or Coach B, one or the other. I'll give it some thought. But we're winding down, and as I mentioned last week, I still don't have my intro music, which my karaoke song is TNT. If you had intro music, any idea what your song would be?
My song would be this song by George Harrison. just because it's called This Song.
But I knew you were going to say something because you are a Beatles fan addict.
Save it for another episode.
We will save it because we will talk heavy Beatles, but it has been an honor to have you. Georgetown, 40 years later, we're here. This has been Around the Horn with CB and my bestest of best, Andrew Stearns. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Great honor.
Final word?
It's all good.
It's all good, and I'm not going to leave by saying, and I'm out, because someone said that is Ryan Seacrest thing, who is, by the way, a Dunwoody Wildcat where I taught for 18 years, but I'm not going to say I'm out. Instead, I'm going to say I'm going to be out. And I'll see you all soon for episode 3.